Hey everyone, my name is Justin. Welcome to the channel where my son and I take a look at games, classic and modern, and give our thoughts on how these games appeal to different generations. Today we're taking a look at Final Fantasy II, recently re-released as part of the Pixel Remaster series. Now, Final Fantasy II is oftentimes looked down upon as sort of the black sheep of the franchise, due in large part to the deviation it takes from normal Final Fantasy or JRPG staples. Thankfully, the updates added into the remaster helped turn this game from a 25-hour-long chore to a quick 10-hour or so long jaunt. The question though is it any good, or is the hate it gets actually deserved?
Final Fantasy II is the story of the Resistance Group trying to stop the Emperor from taking over the world. It opens with our main cast trying to escape their hometown after it's been invaded, only to find themselves overwhelmed and knocked unconscious. When they come to, they are at the Resistance headquarters, but their friend Leon is nowhere to be found. They set out trying to prove they can be useful to the Resistance and end up going on a grand, world-spanning quest to find their friend, aid the Resistance, and stop the Emperor. The main party consists of the trio Firion, Maria, and Guy, with various random characters jumping in to fill the fourth spot while we travel around. These range from Prince Gordon, the monk Joseph, Rickard the Dragoon, Leia the Pirate, and Minwu, the coolest white mage ever. These side characters typically only stay around for a brief while before they tag out and are replaced, assuming they're still alive. Perhaps it's a sign of its age, but the characters in Final Fantasy II don't really have much personality as they don't speak much. Maria is kind and concerned for her brother. Guy is the big, dumb lug that only speaks in broken sentences, and Firion doesn't really speak and functions more or less like a silent protagonist.
Yeah, I thought the side characters were more interesting, which is saying something. Minwu is powerful and wise, Rickard is brave but doesn't have any real arc. Gordon has the closest thing to a character arc as he starts off the game as a coward and slowly grows into being a leader alongside with Princess Hilda.
Combat takes place in random, turn-based battles as you traverse around the world trying to get one up on the Empire. The world opens up almost immediately, which is cool, until you realize it's very easy to go somewhere you absolutely should not be and get wiped out in a very laughable fashion. Now, the main difference between Final Fantasy II and many other games is how it handles story and character progression.
Exactly, son. While the world is open to you pretty early and you have freedom to explore, the story itself is moved along in a pretty linear fashion. Go to X, collect Y. This isn't unique to a JRPG, certainly not for Final Fantasy. But with the world as open as it is, it felt pretty empty and void of things to do. Now again, this is probably an element of its age. The neat change here though is the keyword system. During conversations, sometimes a word will pop up in red and you can learn that word and ask NPCs about it, leading to story progression or just background lore. Character progression is probably the most unique element of Final Fantasy II, and frankly, an anchor around its neck. You purchase spells from the shop, and any of the main three characters can learn any spell. However, unlike most RPGs, you don't level up in Final Fantasy II. Instead, your stats go up at random intervals based on how you play, and your weapons and skill proficiencies increase the more you use them. So, swing your sword a lot, watch strength go up and your sword skill increase. Get hit, and you have a chance your HP might go up. It's a neat system, and one that I'm fairly certain is what inspired the Saga Frontier series, but here it really works against the game by requiring a lot of grinding if you really want to balance your characters, especially the magic system, and not use the boosts.
Final Fantasy II is made of the same pixel art style of Final Fantasy I, though it does have far more detail to the world and characters. It's a simple art style that I, personally, think still holds up for the charm perspective. The big difference, and the one I think is pretty cool, is the spell effects change as you level them up. Fire 1 may just be a little puff of fire, but Fire 16 is this blazing inferno. It gives some small reward outside of just doing more damage to taking the time to level up a spell. Beyond the world, towns, ships, and the monsters look very similar to those found in Final Fantasy I.
Yeah, I agree, son. I like the graphics. It is very similar to Final Fantasy 1, but there's a nostalgia thing there for me. Personally, I found the music though pretty forgettable, which is odd, as I have this strange fondness for the music of Final Fantasy 1, but the tones here just didn't do anything for me. Perhaps it's because I didn't play Final Fantasy 2 as a kid and didn't have that nostalgia draw, but ultimately, nothing stuck.
I sort of agree, Dad. I liked the music and I thought it was cool, but it was also kind of forgettable. I think it was a pretty cool game, and there are a lot of parts I thought, gee, that's a neat mechanic. The keyword system was something different than I'm used to. The weapon skill up mechanism, while, yes, annoying to grind, I think it made a lot of sense and added some realism. I mean, you wouldn't just walk around throwing fireballs and be like, oh look, I'm suddenly better at using swords. What do you think, Dad?
Yeah, I'm more or less with you, son. I think this game is helped greatly by the boosts added in the remasters. Being able to guarantee HP increases is a huge quality of life improvement that the game sorely needed. Speeding up weapon and spell proficiency upgrades makes the grind go almost completely unnoticed. I think my biggest negative here, though, is one that surprisingly we haven't mentioned, and that's the villain. Again, this is likely a product of its time, but the Emperor is completely forgettable. He's just this mustache twirling bad guy that you encounter a handful of times where he pops up, causes mischief, and you move on to the next scenario. Now, for a game from 1988, it was probably pretty cool back then, but to me, he was bland. So, all that considered, what would you rate the game, son?
I'm gonna say 6.5 out of 10. I liked the game, but there are a lot of forgettable elements, and I really struggled to get into it. I found myself multiple times just trying to push through it to get done so we could move on to whatever was next. Like Final Fantasy 1, there's a lack of direction in the game that makes it hard to know where you're going, unless you talk to every NPC you can find. What do you think, Dad?
I think that's fair. Personally, I'm going to go 5 out of 10. I think the game is perfectly mediocre. Final Fantasy 2 is often, as we said, looked at as the black sheep of the franchise, and I think for good reason. There's a lot of neat ideas, and you can see where they were trying to do something new and different, and the boosts certainly help out tremendously. But as a whole, the game just kind of felt flat to me. I am glad I played it, and I think it's worth a run through, especially with the boosts. And while I don't think it deserves all the hate it gets, it's also not a game I think I'll ever be itching to dive back into.
So that's our thoughts on Final Fantasy II. Have you played through this classic? If so, comment below and let us know your thoughts. And hey, if you liked our work, maybe support us with a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks everyone.